So, I've been wanting to do some Total War Warhammer 2 content on the channel for a good while, but I've never really seen the opportunity to do so, as my computer isn't good enough to run a campaign at graphics I would like while still recording at the same time. And a problem I have constantly is that my brain is just too slow and stupid to simultaneously keep track of all that you need to keep track of, especially in a strategy game like this, and also commentate at the same time. But I nonetheless wanted to do some content for the Total War Warhammer series because I fucking love this series. So, I decided we're in the probably final days or final weeks or hey, maybe final months during the lead up to the Total War Warhammer 3 announcement. I am incredibly hyped. I've got about 2,200 hours in Total War Warhammer 2. And I want an excuse to not only talk about what I love about the series, but also talk about what kind of improvements or just hypotheticals there are about Total War Warhammer 3. And I think I figured out a pretty decent way for me to handle that is to simply let the AI duke it out for something visual to go on screen while I talk. And in case you're wondering how I'm doing this, because this game doesn't technically come with its own AI spectator mode, I am technically controlling Grombrindle here. Grombrindle is going to sit here and do absolutely goddamn nothing while an AI plays vampire counts for me against Bretonnians over here. So a siege is going on, which I picked because I wanted to talk about sieges. Sieges are one of the big problems Warhammer 2 has, which is unfortunate because Warhammer 2 is otherwise a phenomenal game. Well, sieges and one other thing I'll get around to doing a video for. And the sieges have a multitude of problems with them, which I wanted to talk about and discuss, like how they could fix it for Warhammer 3, maybe why they made the decisions they did. And the first decision that presents itself to me is these fucking things. Towers. Towers have been in several Total War sieges, and they work decently from game to game. Like in Shogun 2, they just have a radius around them that they fire, and I believe Three Kingdoms handles them the same way. In Warhammer 2, they have gigantic ranges long ahead of them. The range is so big that I believe most artillery pieces are outranged at least by the Tier 3 towers, and once you get to Tier 5 towers, nothing can outrange them. Towers can be destroyed by artillery pieces, but it takes a long time to bring them down. So it means that you can't use artillery in a siege in the way that you should, or at least the way you would in Medieval 2. You can't use it from a distance before the fight to take down walls and towers, unfortunately. This removes quite a bit of strategic depth, especially for factions that have really good artillery, like the Empire, the Dwarfs, and the Vampire Coast. And it just kind of encourages more of an atmosphere of every faction playing pretty well the same, with just rush the walls with melee infantry as soon as possible. The only difference is being for factions that have really good flying units, such as Bretonnia or the Vampire Counts, who get quite an advantage for the fact that they can just fly over the walls, circumventing the entire issue. And I think that maybe Creative Assembly did this as a way of encouraging aggressive play, so that they'll rush the walls. Maybe that's a thing for multiplayer, though I doubt people would go into multiplayer battles not wanting the strategic depth of having viable artillery. Maybe Creative Assembly did it so that just about every faction will be on equal footing. The factions with good artillery won't be particularly ahead. But variety is the spice of life, and in Warhammer especially, the sheer variety really adds to the game. And my god, what are these zombies doing? They're forming a fucking conga line. I think that one of the easiest, quickest things for them to do to fix sieges in Warhammer 3 would be simply shorten the range on towers. This one is so easy that there's a mod that achieves that. I have that mod installed, Zebedee's Reduced Tower Range mod. It's not been updated in like a year, but it still works somehow, so I pretty well always have it installed for this game, because to me it's one of the only things that can make sieges at least playable. But if you exclude the towers, the walls aren't that valuable. Like, the towers are the only thing that makes the walls worth keeping, really. Because not only not only are there siege towers, which allow the enemy to mount the walls without losing any vigor, but every single infantry unit takes a ladder that allows them to mount the walls while only taking a little bit of vigor, not vigor damage, but they only get a little bit more tired. Now, I understand that giving every infantry unit a ladder was a way to make sieges more easy to learn for people who are new to the series, and that was a big focus with Warhammer, was get new people into the series. I did not, like, Total War Warhammer 2 was the first Total War game I ever played. Now I love them, so they succeeded at getting more people in. But the fact that every infantry unit gets a ladder, and I understand why they did it. And at one point I actually agreed with that decision. But the more I thought about it, ladders are not really that advanced of a thing for people to get caught up on, for one thing. And for another, the fact that every infantry unit has a ladder means that you can insert onto the walls at any point on the walls if you're the attacker. Which means the defenders cannot use it to make chokehold points. The defenders cannot use it to kind of strategize around that and bottleneck your units. Which would be one of the better things for the strategic advantage of the walls. The strategic advantage of the walls should be massively limiting the attacking side's options for attacking. And yet, ladders really limit that as a tactical use of walls. So, in the game right now, the only tactical uses of walls are that A, they have towers built in, and B, if the opponent did not take siege towers, then their infantry is going to get a little bit tired. But that's not that big of a bonus. I mean, once the enemy infantry gets onto the walls, once the attacking infantry gets on the walls, it's pretty well just a usual infantry slog, but with even tighter corridors, which is more advantageous for low-tier infantry than it is for high-tier infantry, because there's way less fighting going on, and thus the low-tier infantry will take quite a bit longer to kill than they ordinarily would. So, walls not being valuable is a problem for the defender, especially. For the attacker, it's no problem. And looking at this little list I've got here, we should talk about the gates. Yeah, the gates are a bit of an awkward one. A lot of people just don't touch gates, because the gates have wacky pathfinding. That one's a pretty obvious one to fix from a perspective of someone who isn't a game designer. I'm sure for Creative Assembly they did not have it as, a feature for the game when they were going over the tech was, what if we made the gates just not fucking work? But the gates are a bit buggy. I believe they fixed some of the pathfinding with them, actually, but yeah, with Warhammer 3, especially if they're going to try and fundamentally remake the maps, making the unit pathfinding behave a little better around the gates is a definite focus. And the other thing with gates is that battering rams are trash. Siege equipment, in general, has a bit of a problem in this game, especially in campaign. But battering rams generally aren't very good because, for one thing, they slow the infantry pushing it down, and they don't particularly crack the gate much faster than the infantry mob itself would, just on its lonesome. And there are some units, like I've heard that wolves are very good at cracking infantry gates, though I've just not bothered to use that because I ignore gates most of the time. They should probably make it where battering rams either offer cover to the units protecting them, which I think is the safest decision, or they could make it where gates are tougher for everything except battering rams, which would definitely work at making battering rams better at their job, but I think it would just make gates that much less valuable for the attacking side. Which, I mean, if that's the philosophy they want to go with, by all means, but as the game already is, gates are already something you avoid. And making the gate more accessible would definitely be a way to make cavalry more valid in the game. And that is a complaint that some people have, that cavalry isn't valid enough in the siege, but I've got to admit I've never really had that problem. Since cavalry is fast, it generally doesn't have as bad of pathfinding problems. Or rather, when they run into pathfinding problems, they solve them faster than infantry would. And if you have the tower range reduced through a mod like I do, then you can just smash open holes in the wall and send the cavalry through there. That works. And once you get in past the walls into the city, that can be a bit of a problem. Because this is as far as the map goes. This is a decent bit of space. But considering the massive amount of space outside the walls, it's a little bit ridiculous. Other Total War games include the entirety of a city, and oh look at that, Kemmler won, holy shit, I didn't have to do anything. Good work, Kemmy. But considering other Total War games have the entirety of a city on the map, that is thoroughly unfeasible, not only for tech, because I mean look at how bad this thing is tanking the frame rate right now, it's going from 40 to 30, sometimes 20, but also Warhammer cities in the lore are fucking huge. And it's just not going to be feasible, but they should probably expand the amount of city you get. Because urban warfare was a big part of sieges in, say, Medieval 2, or Three Kingdoms. And here it's pretty well not an element. As soon as you crack open the gate, you make a mad rush for the town center, you clear that out, and you're good. And then, of course, there's the campaign problems. And that one's pretty quick to say, which is to say, it takes too fucking long. It takes way too long to starve out the enemy, which means that starving out the enemy is pretty well never a viable choice. Most of the time, the enemy is going to be able to build an army in time to lift the siege on the city, and even if you're sieging the enemy's last city, you could still just save time by bum rushing the walls. It's not a viable defensive choice, and by all means, the question of time should be vital to sieging and the decision to starve out. Sometimes that makes for an interesting choice. But as it is right now, there is no choice, because no matter what, whether you've got pressure on you or not, bum rushing the walls is always the best choice. And let me go ahead and zoom in here as these guys seem to just stand around celebrating their victory. I love the skeletons in this game. I love how they're very clearly just puppets. Starving out is a problem. Another thing that takes way too long is building siege equipment. In custom battles and multiplayer battles, sieges, which, God, why would you play sieges in multiplayer? But if you do, you're going to see way more battering rams and siege towers than you would in the actual campaign. Because in the campaign, it takes a whole turn to build a battering ram and a whole 2 turns to build a siege tower. And that is simply too long for what you get. I think that if they made battering rams considerably better, and maybe if they made it where you got double the amount of siege towers, that would motivate people to actually stop and do it. And they're not doing it right now. There's just no reason to. It's a waste of time relative to the reward you get. And we're going to head and let this sit on the Pyrrhic victory screen for a little bit, because I've only got a little bit of stuff left to talk about. But yes, the siege equipment, they need to fix that. And the last thing is, the Autoresolve formula really overestimates walls. This is a serious annoyance on the player's part, as it means they have to play way more siege battles than they should. Autoresolve as a feature is there for player convenience, so that you don't have to play battles that you've already been through plenty, and don't have to play battles just to take out forces that are much smaller than yours. But it doesn't really work that way for siege battles. It only really works if you are overwhelmingly crushing the opponent. And I get why walls should give an auto-resolve bonus. They absolutely should. But this being Total War, the overwhelming majority of battles you run into are going to be sieges. And playing, pardon my French, a shitzillion sieges is not very fun, even if the sieges are well designed. Maybe in Medieval 2 it was pretty fun. And maybe if they did improve the sieges quite a bit, it could be quite a lot more fun. But even once I mod sieges to be better with stuff like Sebity's Reduced Tower Range mod, it still gets to be a grind, really, having to do, 4 or 5 sieges in a row. And this also leads into another problem, because the AI in the campaign works its logic off the auto-resolve possibility of winning. And this is more of a present problem on the lower difficulties, which I do play on normal because I'm a coward and I don't like cheesing to win. But it makes the AI too cowardly and try to only go for fights where they have an overwhelming advantage, which means that they almost never siege you. There's a reason why in campaign, it's pretty well mandatory for every faction that can build walls to build walls on miter settlements, because once you do that, the AI just doesn't really consider them targets anymore, because the auto-resolve gives such an advantage to walls. And it makes the AI play more defensively than it really should, and makes campaigns grind to a bit of a halt sometimes, because the AI likes to play defense. But even still, it also makes it so that the AI isn't as aggressive in situations where it really should be. And there have certainly been situations that I have run into, and many others have run into, in campaign, where you get people who declare war on you because they have a racial thing to hate you, most infamously the Wood Elves, but when they declare war on you, they never leave their settlements to actually come and attack because they don't see any weaknesses in your strategy, because of the walls you've got built. So, there's a lot they could do to improve sieges, and what I've suggested here is all very minor, relatively minor stuff. Minor in that they'd still have to redesign the siege maps, but minor also in that they wouldn't have to do a whole lot different from what they are already doing. They'd have to make some changes to tower range or auto-resolve probability for walls, but the biggest change would definitely be, map changes to make, say, gates more relevant, or to increase the amount of real estate that is devoted to the cities. And overall, I would say that I've pretty well summarized it, at least my take on it. And this, I guess, will be the first video of The Road to Warhammer 3, which is a generic title, I know, but a generic title is better than no title. I hope you'll join me for the next video, whatever topic I decide it'll be on. And I'll see you later, folks.